Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles to the Angelo Robles Podcast. I'm also the founder and CEO at Family Office Association. To give a little context to our podcast and our dialogues, I help global families and their family offices solve problems, procure positive future outcomes, and prepare for intergenerational necessity. It's vital for families and their family offices to understand their vulnerabilities and become more resilient so they can mitigate risk and prevail during times of crisis. My experience with some of the wealthiest families in the world has allowed me to distill best practices for discovering purpose, refining vision, governance, structures, systems, processes, and culture that successful families and their safeguard family offices need in order to thrive. I help families create or reinvent their family office to be of institutional quality and highly adaptive. My process engages all generations in the family and focuses on designing a generationally dynamic family office of people, systems, and technology that aligns the desires and capabilities of the rising generation and is able to triumph over challenges. Today's podcast is titled Startup Investing in the Energy and Deep Tech Sectors. We have two very special guests with us today, Dakin Sloss, who's founder and general partner of Prime Movers Lab, and Bill Gross, who's founder of Idealab and CEO of Heliogen. I'm going to do effectively a full bio read because they're incredibly impressive and going to set the tone for the conversation today. Dakin Sloss is noted as founder and general partner of Prime Movers Lab. Over the course of the last decade, he has created billions of dollars of enterprise value, including founding two breakthrough startups, OpenGov and Takius, investing in extraordinary early stage companies like Boom Supersonic and coaching dozens of prime movers, founders who invent breakthrough scientific inventions to transform billions of lives. Dakin serves on the board of Momentous, Heliogen, Kovacs, and we've had Peter Diamandis on before, Tarnova, Carbon Capture, Nutoba, United Tomorrow. Prior to Prime Movers Lab, he served as the founding CEO of Takius, where he built the leading prescription analytics company in the oil and gas industry. There's much more about Dakin. He has an incredibly deep bio for someone so young. I am a little jealous. We're very much looking forward to our conversation. A little bit about Bill Gross. Bill Gross is the founder of Idealab and CEO of Heliogen. In 1996, filled with ideas, Bill started his own dream laboratory, a company incubator modeled after Edison's lab, named Idealab. The company's mission is to challenge the status quo, to be bold, and to tackle big ideas that others would not. Idealab celebrated its 21st anniversary, and during its more than 2 decades, it has started more than 150 companies, created more than 10,000 jobs, and has had more than 45 successful IPOs and acquisitions, 7 of which for over $1 billion. Bill's newest efforts in clean energy include Energy Vault, Heliogen, Carbon Capture, and Point Load Power, companies whose breakthrough technologies will meaningfully reduce the world's reliance on fossil fuels. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, we have a lot to discuss today. Why don't we jump right into it? Bill, I'm going to start with you. I read your mission. It's called, your mission at Idealab is to challenge the status quo, to be bold and tackle big ideas. Why do you have such a grand vision, and what does that mean to you?
Well, we really are trying to make the biggest impact on the world that we can. So we try and find big problems that have technological solutions. There are many problems in the world, but the ones that have technological solutions are ones where we can invent something and then deploy it and scale it. And you can have such huge impact with technology at scale that we feel huge satisfaction in our ability to make the world a better place by doing so. At the same time, making the world a better place, there's crazy large economic opportunity. Like where I'm focused right now, the energy space, there is a place for an entire energy transition to renewable energy. So it's trillions of dollars of opportunity. So it's a chance to do good and make a lot of money at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, and we'll get into it relative to climate change and the opportunity for clean energy, which will be so valuable for really all of us around the world. I would like to briefly go into effectively advice for investors that are looking into the energy sector, maybe intimidated by it. You have earlier stage, later stage, and project finance. If you could talk from your perspective a little bit about all of them.
Sure. Well, project finance is the easiest. Project finance is taking a look at existing projects that have shown long-term reliability, that have bankability, that have proven returns. Certain wind farms, solar farms, other projects like that can show very nice double-digit unlevered returns, and they have good historical proof of that. Those are later stage. They're not very risky, and they can have a very positive impact. And like I said, they can have pretty good unlevered returns. As you move to the very early stage technologies, it's very risky, especially in the energy space, I would say, because of the following thing. In the energy space, it really is just all about the money. It's not like you can differentiate your product like an iPhone versus a Google phone versus a Nokia phone, where features and design, it's not like the fashion industry where you can make a product where the design wins. It's all about the money. I mean, people want to pay the lowest price for their energy. So at the very early stage, it's very difficult to discern what the long-term cost is going to be. So you are taking a gamble. However, if it pays off, the upside is just insane, because once you have something that can beat the price of fossil fuels, then the demand is so large, because electrons are basically, like if you're talking about electricity for one, electrons are almost the most undifferentiated commodity there is. Every electron coming out of your wall outlet is identical to any other wall outlet anywhere on Earth. Even aluminum as a commodity has variation in grade or purity, but electrons, they're all the same. So you have to win on price. So coming up with an energy technology that can win on that is very, very hard, but extremely valuable. But at the early stage, you need to do a lot of diligence on the outcome that technology can have. Can it really be competitive? At the middle stage, after companies already have some proof on the economics, after they've done the techno-economic analysis, there's also a very, very good chance for returns, because at least the technology risk has been taken out, and now you're only betting on scale-up risk. And in that case, again, each one of those three stages has a different amount of upside, but commensurate amount of risk. But I think all of them right now have wind at our backs, because the world is making a transition and the demand is so large. It's probably between $10 trillion and $30 trillion just by the end of the decade. So there's very few industries that have that large of a total addressable market and that much push for so many people to want to buy the product. I mean, the energy that is a result of that.
That is very true. And I do want to follow up upon that. That was excellent in terms of your description. We have a sophisticated membership of active investors in VC, and it's one of the subjects we most often cover. But given that it's a podcast, a larger audience will see it and may need a little bit of clarity and understanding. But to give a little bit of the basics, when you're early stage investing, even the best of the best, yourself and so many other brand names that we know, probably 8 out of 10 times, it's just not going to work. Yeah. And if you're really looking for the unicorn, it's probably closer to 1 in 100 to perhaps 120 is probably about the average. But there is a but. If you have the capital and the resources and you're willing to stomach that you're going to be investing in companies, maybe relatively modest amounts of money, but a lot of them are just going to go to zero. But if you understand that you may get that 1 in 117 that becomes the unicorn, your return could be incredibly outsized. But if you want more later stage, you're more likely to have some level of success, but you're not going to get the tremendous outsized return. So this is something that any accredited investor, qualified purchaser, or more in my world, a single family office is going to need to make a decision on. Maybe it's a combination of such. When you see families of significance reaching for the stars, what would you tell them, whether they're investing through a fund that's early stage, through SPVs, that especially SPVs, if they're early stage in what you're talking about, they really may need to make a commitment to 10 or 20 such investments, don't you think?
I think so. This would be my advice, however. Unless you have the technological background to evaluate the core essence of the technology, both patentability, viability, economic analysis, like I said, then you really are, but one, heavily betting on the team. So it's looking at the people who are running the company. Do you really believe in their ability to both have an outstanding idea, but also to execute on it? But then there's one other one that I always look at, and I evaluate for ourselves when we go forward with ideas is, what is the unique angle? What is the new insight that this team has that gives them sort of an unfair advantage? And that unfair advantage could be a new technology that came out that they're now applying to some new area, or sleepy competitors that haven't seen a new thing yet, or a change in the marketplace. Like there has to be something that is a discontinuity that just happened to give that team an ability to pull off this new bold thing they're trying to do. And if you see that, you improve your odds dramatically. From what you just described, you made it sound like, well, make 100 bets and maybe one of them works. I think it can be much, much smarter than that by making 20 bets and getting one of them to work, or making 10 bets and getting one of them to work, because you applied this filter of an outstanding team and some novel insight that they have that you can evaluate. You can't evaluate the pure essence of the technology, but you can evaluate, as a smart person, all the people here would be smart enough to do that, is do they have a hook? Do they have something that they know that other people don't yet know that is going to be true? And that's what we look for in all of the ideas. And I think that it leads to higher returns, because that is the competitive advantage against other investors, I believe.
And if I can add to that, Bill's numbers testify to the success of that strategy. Out of 140 companies that Idealab started, he has $7 billion exits, and 40 of those that are up and running at this point. So much better odds than most people. I think for family offices, and I see some of our LPs actually on this call right now, we often get this question of like, how would you go about building out a portfolio of funds and of direct investments? And I really think most family offices need to be in at least 5, 6, 7, 8 VCs that are across a different range of early stage, later stage companies in different sectors like energy or transportation or consumer web, like kind of covering the spectrum, and then doing some co-investments alongside some of those VCs to get exposure to direct deals. And I think one thing that a lot of family offices recognize is if a deal is coming to a family office rather than a VC at an early stage, a question that should be asked is, why is it coming to me? Like, who's passed over this? And whereas if it's coming as a co-invest from like a trusted VC relationship, then it's often been vetted, and some of that techno-economic and more complex analysis that requires many, many full-time people to do has happened already at that point.
Yeah, I would. That's great, Dakin. I would add to it and say, a family office that has a company which is already on fire and has a chance to invest in it after it's going really well, that's almost like an unfair advantage, because you didn't have to take the risk at the early stage, and you get to come in, if you have that opportunity, after it's already proven, when many other people wouldn't have access. So your access via a VC fund to double down on the winners is it's incredible. Like I have to start every company from scratch to have my chance to invest at a later stage. The idea that you could invest in a VC fund and then cherry pick the ones that both resonate with you and after they're already off to the races, that really, I think, can yield higher returns. And like Dakin said, you don't have to do the analysis at that point. It's already proven in the marketplace. The customer's proving it for you. So that really is a great way to go.
You actually both said things I would like to follow up on, so it's for either of you. If that's the case, you are correct. And even you as an earlier stage investor, you could start to see when they're getting traction, when they're getting growth, and they're more likely to be successful. Do you have pro rata rights? How could families, come on in subsequent rounds, potentially if they need a infusion of capital relative to an SPV or co-investing? You have so much experience in this that you probably identify this relatively early on when you're starting to see their traction.
Yeah, this is our whole strategy, and a lot of the reason that a lot of our LPs have invested with us. So we have pro rata rights, and so we're able to kind of invest across stages. And the way we build our portfolio is, say, in our first fund, 15 companies, in our second fund, 30 companies, just like I would suggest doing with VC managers. And then we've piled on in our first fund to 5 of those 15. In our second fund, it'll be like 10 of those 30. And then our LPs have gone in and put in another 50% on top of what's in the fund already into co-invest alongside us in those later stages, because as an early stage fund, we're not going and deploying into series Bs and Cs and Ds. All of the ones that are winning and like winning, obviously, now our LPs are getting the benefit of that through SPVs.
Oh, for sure. No, that's a very, very valuable strategy. And taking on what you said about 2 or 3 minutes ago reminded me a couple of months back, we had Jason Calacanis on, and I asked him the question on early stage investing, skipping VC for a family office and going direct. And he basically said, usually the deal's been shopped around like crazy and they consider that to be, pardon the pun, Angelo, but stupid money. I think that's changed a little bit. I think some family offices have built out internal teams and have gotten more sophisticated, and I have been encouraging of that. But that being said, that then brings up the issue with yourself and with Bill. How are you getting, you must be getting a truckload of deals coming at you. You're sourcing them, you're vetting them. And how are you competing with other competitive VCs in the market, or are you all investing at once?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point. And I think if a family office is going to get into early stage VC, they should think about it as, I'm going to build out a team of early stage VC inside. And at that point, it really is a VC that's just inside a family office, because it takes that kind of networking, sourcing, diligence, company support to actually have the kind of odds that Bill has produced in his phenomenal track record. And I think from a sourcing perspective, the thing that we've invested in as a firm is relationships with incubators like Idealab. And, you know, like every time Bill and I are talking every other week, and he's telling me the next dozen companies that are going to come out of that, and we're getting the first look at that. And the same thing happens. One of my partners used to run the Stanford StartX fund, and, you know, is seeing, you know, hundreds of Stanford entrepreneurs on a regular basis and seeing the next companies that they're going to build. We have the same thing with Berkeley, with Caltech, with MIT. And you've got to be plugged in that way to kind of get quality early stage deal flow. And yeah, I mean, to make 15 investments in Fund 1, we looked at more than 5,000 companies. And that's the kind of volume of things you need to be checking out to find the gold nuggets. And
Dakin, maybe staying with you and going a little bit to the next topic, we're bouncing around quite a bit, but lots to cover. Deep tech. If you don't mind, one, explain what that means to our audience. What is deep tech?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll also answer the question about competition as part of that as well. So in the software or in the VC ecosystem, you know, some crazy large percentage, you know, 85, 90+% goes to software stuff. And the last decade was really about software eating the world. We first had like a social mobile local wave, then we had an enterprise SaaS wave. The next decade is not going to look like that at all. The next decade is about energy technology, transportation technology, infrastructure, manufacturing, human augmentation, the future of each of these areas where computing is now being applied to the physical world and to hardware, where you can have iteration cycles at the early stage that look much more like software in hardware worlds. And so that's what deep tech is about, where the value of the company is in the IP that has already been created. Whereas in a software company, you know, somebody can slap together a deck. Bill and I do this for fun sometimes together. Slap together a deck, and 9 days later, there's a term sheet. There's nothing to evaluate on those companies other than the quality of the team and the idea and the market. Whereas in deep tech, there's often maybe been hundreds of iterations around early IP from academics or from phenomenal inventors like Bill before you ever get to the point of it really being a company. And these types of companies are going to define all of the returns in our view over the next decade, and it's the only thing that we invest in as a result. And it requires a very specialized skill set to do so at the early stage, because you're really fundamentally trying to distinguish science risk, which is, will this work at some point, versus engineering risk, as Bill talked about, which is now we've got something that's worked and we just need to manufacture and produce it and scale it up. And if you invest in science risk, it's super high risk. It takes a long time. It's very capital intensive, and you're likely to lose your money kind of in a portfolio approach. Whereas if you invest in engineering risk, you can consistently produce phenomenal returns.
There's another thing I would add about deep tech, Dakin, is obviously deep tech is all around us in our lives, you know, like in COVAX with vaccines and energy, like we're talking about, like you said, transportation, it's all around us. It requires, like you said, a lot more scientific knowledge to do the diligence, because it is science. So, you know, you're a physicist, you can do that evaluation. You have chemists on staff, they can do that evaluation. You have mechanical engineers on staff, they can do that evaluation. That gives you a competitive advantage against other VCs who don't have that. Other VCs that are looking at consumer products or enterprise products are just looking at the product from their own perspective. Like, would I use this in my company? Or do I think my kids would use this TikTok application? In other words, it's more consumery. I'm not saying there isn't a big consumer market. I'm just saying it's much more evenly distributed and people have opinions about that who can make judgments on that. Whereas the deep tech area, it's more specialized. I think that gives us an advantage. So you're doing that as an investor. I'm doing that as a creator. I feel there are fewer people doing that. So we can make outsized returns because we have less competition. There really are. And just to further pile on a compliment to you, Dakin, when I am considering a VC and I have a deep tech product, deep tech company idea, I want to come to you because you can not only evaluate it, like other VCs I talk to, they would have to bring in consultants or advisor to help them evaluate it. I don't want another middleman. I want to talk to the person who's making the decision. But you can actually add value to the idea when we're doing the diligence because you have enough smarts in the field to actually help us as a company. That's very rare. Most VCs, so you heard I did 150 companies and we've done probably 3 rounds of financing each. So I've talked to 450 VCs over the years, take away some duplicates because we work with people multiple times, but hundreds of VCs. And so few VCs really add a lot of value relative to being a good investor and making a few introductions. They don't add value to the actual technology. And that's a place where you with your firm, Dakin, can do that. And we really appreciate that. But that's also a place where as a family office making investment in a VC firm, you get the benefit of that. You get the benefit in Dakin's case of a firm that really helps their companies be more successful in a fundamental way, not just by introductions or having some advice at the board meeting, but fundamentally to the technology. And that's pretty great.
When you're talking about things in deep tech that are very advanced, AI, robotics, I guess even blockchain, biotech, and quantum computing, I mean, these are very complex and potentially game-changing for those that become the next big thing. And I know that's going to be very hard. Yeah. This goes back to the age-old issue of things that could change the world like that. Will they? The answer is kind of yes, but I'll ask it. Will they wipe out existing companies? It may not happen next year or the year after, but will our S&P 500, as it always does, look very different 20 years from now than it does right now?
It's going to look very different 5 years from now. I mean, listen to this one. 5 years and Exxon went from $500 billion to $133 billion. And Zoom went from 0 to 134 billion. Zoom just passed Exxon in market cap. Okay, so there's an example. Now, a lot of things happened. COVID happened, which maybe caused a lot of Zoom's uprise. I mean, we're talking on Zoom right now because of that. But there's going to be huge transformations in society from medicine, from everything you said, from medicine, from AI, from quantum. Quantum computing is going to completely shake up companies. I can't tell you the exact date, but it's going to have huge, huge impacts. AI is already having huge impacts on many of the companies that we know now. The big 5 companies right now use AI throughout. But there's going to be even more fundamental changes in what AI is going to do in terms of augmented humanity, augmented brain power, things like that. So I think we're really going to see very, very big changes over the next few years and over the next few decades, faster than you might even predict.
Yeah, I would just echo that sentiment. I mean, people are really bad at understanding the power of exponentials. And we're at this very unique moment in history where exponential technology is now being applied to very fundamental things across our lives that we're talking about, such that it's not decades, it's years. You're seeing a lot of companies in this moment actually go public that are going to completely change the nature of the public markets, I think, and give people access to kind of growth level stocks again. And when you look out 30 years, life isn't going to look at all like what people think about, because you compound these things that have already been in progress for a couple decades and are now being scaled up. It's kind of crazy to imagine what does a future civilization look like, and it's fun to get to do that every day.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up over the last couple of months, I've had some futurists and deep thinkers from a Peter Diamandis to a Vivek Wadhwa and so many different others. And probably it falls into about a 50-50 camp. You probably know the next question I'm going to ask, and that is, our future in 5 or 10 years, is it going to be jobless and chaos? Or do we always seem to say that, and then more jobs and opportunities get created with the advancement of technologies? You can't go in the middle. Which one?
What I would say is, to be frank, I've always been kind of the opinion that, we over exaggerate these concerns and more jobs are going to come about. And I have some ideological biases that lead me that way. I've actually been looking a lot more at the data of this recently. And I think you are going to see a major change in structural employment. I don't think it's like 10 years, but I think over the next 50 years. And I'm actually quite excited about a future if the politicians can navigate this transition, right? And that's like a very important transition to navigate, where employment isn't a fundamental fact of life for many people. And there is a standard of living that's just available due to the technological abundance that is coming, such that people can do things that they want to do, not because they have to do them. Now, we do have these two competing forces. We have a lot of political instability at the moment that if it goes the wrong way, is going to get in the way of that technological progress. And so we have a tough job for our politicians, and the decisions that are being made by politicians are going to really determine whether we can get to that place and give technology a long enough runway to create that abundance.
Yeah, that's a very complex issue, which goes to the fact that we have over 300 million people in the country. Most of them are not quote unquote technologists. They utilize the technology, but they're probably also a little bit afraid of what it could do. And their vote counts every bit the same as someone who's a tech billionaire. So in theory, depending on how much noise they make, and I understand why they would want to make noise and show concern, the politicians are going to listen to the most number of people that could help to get them the votes. There's going to be more have-nots than there are haves. So counting on politicians to do the right thing and make some tough decisions, that might be a little optimistic.
Well, I'm not saying that it's easy. I'm torn as an optimist and a pessimist in these two different realms. I'm not very optimistic about the political environment and what impact politicians are going to have on our lives over the next couple of decades. I am very optimistic that if they don't mess it up too badly, it won't turn out to matter in the long run, because the level of abundance and the level of resources that companies like Bill's are producing are going to just fundamentally change the economic paradigm in which we're operating. If we get to a place where the greatest corollary of quality of life is cost of energy. Low costs of energy per capita fundamentally predict how good of a life does someone have. And the types of innovation that Bill has with Heliogen, with carbon capture and Energy Vault are on track to set us up for a place where the cost of energy is next to nothing for most people. And as a result, some of the current dialogue about have and have not, I think, can shift when there is so much to have that we can all be in a place of gratitude for all the things that we have, rather than comparison about a few people who may have a bit more.
All good points. And maybe, Bill, I'll ask you, and it's kind of related a little bit to this theme. Apparently, we can't really rely on large existing companies to have much innovation in some of the things you're talking about. Part of it is probably due to entrenchment, and a lot of it is simply due to they're big and they're bureaucratic. There are exceptions, DeepMind at Google and some of the tech companies, true. But in general, it seems like the next great innovations in what you're investing in is coming from people from all walks of life that are starting something from nothing.
Yeah, I think that entrepreneurship over my lifetime has gotten wildly more democratic and wildly more possible for a small team to attack a big gorilla. And I think it's because there's much more information available to everybody on the planet, but also the internet gives you the reach of the whole planet. So when I started out as a teenager doing my little mail order business, I only could reach the people I could reach in the back of Popular Science magazine that came out once a month, and I could advertise in 3 months in advance with little tiny ads. So my reach was very, very tiny. And then when I started my little loudspeaker business, I could only reach the people who came to my Colorado Boulevard store in Pasadena. And then when I started even an educational software company, I had to go through distributors to retailers and get my product on shelves and have parents come pick them up at Walmart and at Target. And everything was too many obstacles to get to your customer. And now you have the whole planet. So if it's like an Archimedes lever that can move the earth. You can take your brain power now, figure out a need, meet it, and you can scale like crazy. You can scale to multi-billion-dollar companies, not from the standpoint of making $1 billion, but from the standpoint of having impact on 1 billion people. Like, you can find the 1 billion people out of the 7 billion that need what you're making. and now you can reach them. That was never possible before. So I actually think it gives much more power to the small guy. And the small guy has to, well, anyone, small or big, has to iterate quickly. Like it takes lots of iteration to find something that a billion people want. Like you have to keep on trying and tweaking and adjusting and testing and improving. And that is not the nature of a big company. The nature of a big company is to protect the revenues they have, not to be doing lots of little experiments where they have nothing to lose. So I think there's a constant turnover, there always has been, a constant turnover of old companies that don't continue to move and little guys that are innovating. And I think that the balance has tilted in favor of the little guy innovator. And I think what big companies now are doing is realizing they either need to acquire those people, and they're doing lots of acquisitions. They're using their balance sheets and market cap to do that. Or they need to bring some of that DNA into their company, or they need to partner with those kind of companies. Like we even have big companies coming to us on the energy front, and they're saying, look, we're not an innovator, but we got the balance sheet, and we can do we can do big projects, and we can fund those. We'll rely on you for the innovation. So I think companies are rethinking how they make it happen. It's very hard for them to do it inside their company because there's antibodies in the company effectively trying to protect the status quo. Like a big company moves into protection mode. Everybody wants to protect their revenues, their bonuses, their plans, their all that. So it's very hard for them to take risky experiments. Some companies have done it, like you said. You know, Google from the very beginning has been a company where the leadership has just been incredible. Microsoft, the new leadership there, has had them doing a lot of reinvention.
For sure.
But it's very, very hard for a big company. I mean, just think about, you have 100,000 or even, you know, in Amazon's case, million-person company. Those companies are amazing at how they keep on doing new things despite the overwhelming inertia and weight that they have as a company. But they're the rare exception. Many of the big companies have to find some new way to innovate or some way to partner with innovation.
And Dakin, back to you, you know, having started two companies from nothing, like the verbiage I used a little while ago, and now basically investing in coaching and being active in that part of the community, are there some commonalities and traits that you see? Everyone is going to be smart, but is it as simple as grit and resilience? Is it an idea? Is it sometimes money? They just need a little more time and more money, but how do you know when enough is enough and move on to the next idea?
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's only one thing that all successful startups have in common. They didn't give up. That's it. So it does boil down to grit and resilience. And right, one of the reasons why it's such a pleasure to work with Bill is even on Bill's tough days, Bill is like, I'm changing the world. I'm fixing these problems. There's no stopping me no matter what. And that's the perspective you have to have with humility of like taking feedback. And it is that kind of like weird balance of, I know where I'm going and nothing is getting in my way, but oops, I just ran into an obstacle and I ran into another one and I ran into another one. Maybe I should take a better path than I'm currently taking to where I'm going. So the second thing beyond resilience and grit is adaptability and flexibility to kind of take and turn the vision into what it needs to be and turn the product into what it needs to be based on the feedback that you're getting. And frankly, yeah, everybody's smart. The smart part isn't the predominant thing. It's those two things. We work with some entrepreneurs that I would not call the smartest people that I know, but that are wildly successful because they work their butts off to get to the vision that they want, and they keep switching and adapting as they need to based on the actual like circumstances they run into.
Yeah, but true. You must be able to think, although you're young, but your experience is to be able to identify that in them. And I'm sure you're wrong. No one's perfect. But like I said, if there's 1 in 117 is the average unicorn, you know, you guys are batting certainly much better than that. You're doing something correct that others aren't.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that we do as we're assessing companies and entrepreneurs at the beginning that I think are unique. One of the tools that we use is we kind of understand like what are the top things that are driving people. Is it having an impact? Is it personal growth? Is it the connection they build with their team? Is it a sense of feeling important? Is it a sense of the variety? Each of these things are going to result in different levels of drive ultimately and sustainability. And so we really dig into personal psychology a lot and use some specific tools there that are very helpful for us. The other thing that we really do is we assess this in the process of people going through our diligence process. There are moments in our diligence process that are designed to be difficult and seem like we're probably not going to invest. And we see how founders deal with that. And it's not like we treat them poorly or anything like that, but we put up roadblocks and we put up obstacles and see if they can overcome that. And fundamentally, like with an early stage entrepreneur, particularly in these areas that are very, intense businesses to build, as I'll put it. We look for people with track record. We look for people with experience. Now, we're fortunate Bill has the best track record and that we get to work with him on a couple of companies. But we in general look for people who have built companies before. I know what I was like as a 21-year-old founder, and I'd rather spend my time helping Bill than helping myself as a 21-year-old founder.
Yes, I would understand. And Bill, going back a little bit, I might have hinted at it a little earlier in some of my questioning, but what you're doing in terms of energy, which is truly amazing. And we had on relatively recently people like Jeremy Grantham, who's a major voice and financial backer, including philanthropic, to climate change and even technologies that are evolving in that. And it's going to sound like I'm a little bit anti-big company from what I said a couple of minutes ago. But you mentioned the establishment, a company like Exxon that now Zoom, which is not the most sophisticated overall, technological advancement in the world. So, kudos to them. It's amazing. Shocking. I haven't heard that stat that they're worth more than a company that was once the largest company on earth, whatever, 30 or so years ago. Do you find that the establishment and the entrenchment of some of those large companies are fighting tooth and nail from a political and other perspective to hang on, or?
They're using every weapon in their toolkit. Yeah, they've got lobbyists, they've got balance sheet, they've got advertising, they've got brand. They're using everything they have. The only way to compete is to beat them on product market fit. To do something that meets your customer needs better than them. And if you do that, the customer wins. And the customer's voice ends up giving you the power. But it's hard. It's very hard to do that.
Would it be, it's too simplistic to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. If I was them, shouldn't they be identifying what could be potentially earlier stage, but going to the next level? They have billions of dollars and just invest with you and others, and not to kill the technology, although that probably might have happened here and there, but simply to ride the coattail of the next wave that's coming.
Well, I would say yes, and some of the smart ones are, and some of them, figuratively have their heads in the sand, and in some of those oil company cases, their drills in the sand, and some of them don't. I'll say the 8 oil majors, I'd say 4 of them have embraced what you just said. We need to go find the best companies and partner with them because they're going to help us revamp our business. And 4 of them have said, no, we're going to double down. We're going to drill more. We're going to do what we're doing. That's what we're good at. We're not going to change. So different companies have different strategies. The end game is not written yet, but I'm going to bet on the 4 that are looking to the future. And of course, they're the ones who are talking to us. But yes, they are doing exactly as you said.
Yeah, I mean, it might be ignorance, but I think some of it is not necessarily that. They're relatively smart people. I think it's driven by Wall Street. It's driven by quarterly profitability, people keeping their job, getting their bonuses, keeping the status quo. And they know that they're going to be screwed. I was going to use a different word, but it's a family podcast. But that may be 10, 15 years from now. They'll be gone then.
Right. Yeah, it all depends on their time horizon. Like British Petroleum brought in a new CEO. And he has said, I'm going to build our company for the future in a new renewables world for an energy transition. And we are going to invest in that like crazy. And maybe he took a small short-term hit, but he was going to take a hit no matter what, because oil prices are down and drilling for oil has negative returns right now. So in fact, in an ironic way, COVID is maybe going to accelerate the transition to a new energy world, because it's so uneconomic to sell oil right now because the demand got reduced due to COVID. When everybody stopped flying and everybody stopped driving, there was such a shock to oil. Oil went negative almost for a short period, that forced companies to rethink their strategy. And like I said, 4 of them said, I'm going with the future. 4 of them said, I'm staying in the past.
Yeah, I used to actually run an oil and gas technology company, and I would sit down with senior executives at Shell and BP and Chevron and Exxon and all these guys, and there's obviously some that are kind of stuck in the past, but a lot of them are actually like very forward-looking thinkers here. And you sit down with them and you're trying to pitch them something that's going to make their current oil and gas assets more effective, and they're like, yeah, that's great. Like, go talk to this guy. Like, I'm focused on like how we're doing wind and solar and nuclear and the big things that are going to fundamentally change the next 30 years for the business.
Yeah, true. No, I could see that. In terms of when you're looking at these earlier stage companies and these entrepreneurs and probably asking yourself things like, how defensive is the technology? Has it been validated by the industry? And probably a big one, how fast is the technology evolving? If you could give us some insights, perhaps even secrets of things that you internally look for in an earlier stage company that helps you have such a great track record.
Bill, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's hard. It's really hard. For me, I even gave a little TED talk about this. I've come to conclude that the underrated factor in evaluating those things is timing. I think that timing really matters. Like the energy companies I'm doing now are very well timed. It took me a long time to get to the right time, but now they're timed very well because the world cares about it. There are so many things that you can control about your product or your offering, but if the world isn't ready for what you're making yet, or if other technologies to make your product ready for the world aren't ready yet, or aren't deployed in a large enough scale yet, it's almost like nothing you can do. You're like pushing spaghetti uphill or something like that if you're trying to do something ahead of its time. So I'll give you an example. Uber took off like crazy because of two timing things that they had no control over when they first came out. First is the iPhone shipped with GPS. So everybody all of a sudden had GPS in their phone. And without GPS in their phone, Uber doesn't work. Because if the drivers couldn't show you the moving dot on the map where they were, that was one of the most killer things. Uber didn't create GPS, but they came out at a time when it was being deployed at scale. The second thing for Uber was Uber came out during the Great Recession. And all of a sudden, they needed drivers and people were out of work. Like unemployment was really, really high. So it was very easy to get drivers. And they needed supply to enable the whole thing to work. And they had to get supply before riders could come because they had to have a driver close to you so you could get picked up quickly. So those two timing things really, really caused them to take off. That idea tried 2 years earlier would have just failed because two things that were necessary to make it happen weren't in place. So when you're starting off at the very beginning, you really need to look very closely. Are the things in place necessary that are outside of your control to enable your company to succeed, whether it's on the demand side or technology side or other things like that? And yes, we have to find great people. That's very hard. That's up to all the normal judgment issues and challenges and the things like Dakin said, trying to figure out their adaptability and how their work ethic and all those things. Those always apply. But the timing thing, I think many companies go out of business because the timing is not right. And I would say that's one extra thing that people should give more attention to than they do. And now I do. I didn't used to. Well, by definition, if you're trying to do something new and bold, you are ahead of your time. The question is, are you a year ahead or are you 5 years ahead? If you're a year ahead, you can grow into it. If you're 5 years ahead, you're going to go out of business because you can't wait that long. Like it's very hard to stick around for 5 years while you're waiting for people to catch up to your idea.
I'm going to ask a long-winded question to get to probably a pretty simple question, and that relates to the U.S. is dominant in early stage investing in VC. We do many things well in America, but that is definitely one of them. We have some competition from China, from Korea, from Israel. And again, the more it gets globalized and entrepreneurs have opportunities, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But there are some detriments here as well. The tremendous cost of being in Palo Alto and Silicon Valley, Boston, New York, less so Austin. And just look at the demographics. We have 400 million or so people in North America. In Southeast Asia alone, just Southeast Asia, there's 4 billion. A lot of American investors in companies initially tend to be very centric to the US. They come here, this is where they get their funding, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm basically getting around to saying is, are we going to be in for much more tremendous competition from Chinese companies that may have much lower cost as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing you've already seen, so I run my venture capital firm out of Jackson, Wyoming, Bill's in Pasadena. Neither of us are in those central hubs, and I think we were a bit ahead of the curve. Our team is distributed around the country, and we've got companies distributed around the country. I think it becomes much less important in this world, and you've had so many people who, poo-pooed working from home and have now tried doing it and being on Zoom. And it works, and you can get the job done. You have a better quality of life living wherever it is that you want to live. So I think you're going to see a much wider distribution of companies throughout the country now. Tons of my friends have left the Bay Area in the last 6 months, and New York, and even places like Austin. You've actually had people leaving as well to get to, in their version of more rural life. But on a global level, I think you're seeing this accelerate. I think there's differences between different ecosystems. So China, historically was very good at taking and kind of copying innovation coming out of the US and then scaling it up. They have now become, frankly, a better AI ecosystem than there is in the US. That isn't happening yet in the hardware realm and in the areas that Bill and I focus on more these days. So I don't see China kind of taking over in deep tech or in those particular areas. But we need to invest in education here in the United States. Like, the reason that we are getting out competed in some areas is other places are starting to have better educational systems and produce higher levels of talented workers. And if you're worried about, US-China relations, for example, there's nothing more important you can invest in than kind of fundamental STEM education, so that we've got good folks here ready to build these types of companies for the next generations to come.
Yeah, I would add that the U.S. has had this great, like you said, great advantage for a long time. What are some of those reasons? Well, we had a lot of great colleges. So we have great workers to join the companies. We have great capital formation. I mean, the very thing that we're doing right here. The group of people you're talking to are really, really ambitious at investing in startups in the United States. We have great VC, both track record and ecosystem. We have great mentorship available. And we have a culture which is very Wild West-ish innovation, take chances. We don't throw away people with a failed company. In fact, for me, if I'm interviewing an entrepreneur that we want to bring into one of our companies, they're almost better if they have a failure under their belt, if they learn the right things from it. Because whereas, say, in France or in some places elsewhere in the world,
it's shameful.
You get a little bit of a scarlet letter, if you have a failure under your belt. So the combination of our bankruptcy laws, our cultural view on taking chances, really have made us great in that area. Like you said, Israel's fantastic too, and Asia's catching up. What we have done, I think, better than almost any other country, for sure, is we have built companies that go global better than those other countries. So China has not had, besides TikTok, China hasn't had a lot of translated companies of theirs that make it here. WeChat is huge there, Alibaba is huge there, but it's not huge here. Now with the trade war and other things going on, there's going to be less crossover. But the United States companies have been really, really good at building to be global companies. And that has been a core competence as well, which I hope we maintain. But I completely agree with Dakin. We need great students. All these companies are populated with brilliant people out of college. And we have to be committed to, my personal bias is we shouldn't have great people from all over the world come to our colleges here and send them home afterwards. We want them to stay here. So I think we need to take the smartest people and really retain them, because that is our core competitive advantage. I mean, it really comes down to brain power in the end.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the demographics of Silicon Valley and some of the great companies there, it's a lot of people of heritage where they were born abroad, or at minimum their parents were, and they came here, and now it's almost discouraged in terms of staying here, at least. And you're taking these people and they're going to build great companies, employ people, pay taxes, do so much back in their country that's making it more, quote unquote, advantageous. As the world is theoretically more flat and the ecosystem is changing, they're more able to do that than they might have been 10 or 15 years ago.
One more thing about the world's flat. It has been flattening, but as Dakin said, people are leaving Silicon Valley, people are going to where they want to live, changing cost of living, don't have to commute as much. We've been home, for the last months. We're working in California. Our companies are dispersed. I think you're going to see the first billion-dollar company where the people have never met, where they only, like Dakin has probably made his first investments where he didn't meet the entrepreneur in person. I don't know if you've done that yet, but where you only met over Zoom. Is that true? Have you done any investments where you met only over Zoom, or have you met everybody?
Yes. I had also done that before COVID too.
Yeah, right. But most people before would never make an investment without meeting in person, having some dinners, whatever. We have now made hires without meeting the people in person, across our companies. That we never did before. So you could totally see, due to Zoom and other technologies, now Slack and Teams and other things, companies being formed from people living where they want to live from across the planet, and they've never ever been in the same room together, and they can still impact 1 billion people positively on a planet. That's unheard of, and that is really a powerful thing.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, what was going to happen with technology was simply accelerated with COVID.
Yes.
And in some ways, a little scary and different, but in many ways, I mean, I'll use me in my community, someone in my mid-50s. I'm in a conservative community, the single family office community, very reluctant to change. And now they had no choice. They needed to reinvent themselves. And here's the most common thing that I heard. Oh, this Slack and project management and technologies and other forms of communication. Why didn't I do this years ago? It's easy.
Yeah, well, another example of that. Another industry that was crazy resistant to these new technologies, partly because of laws, but also out of tradition, was telemedicine. Like the idea that I wasn't able to call my doctor and have a Zoom and save both of us tons of time and heartache to do something. And again, they were all forced to do it, right? And now all of a sudden, that's a burgeoning productivity boom to the whole medical profession and to humanity to be able to do telemedicine. And they were just resisting, and they got their arm twisted, and it opened up the floodgates. So many areas are like that. I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk about my community for a second. So a family of great wealth, in Greenwich, Connecticut, where I am, they need to have their family office locally. People have to, go from New York, from Jersey to get there. The answer is why. The water cooler effect is certainly overrated, I think, especially in the family office community. And now the employer has the world as their oyster. Yeah. They could have people from all over the world that may be more talented and even more cost effective, but that goes both ways. The employee has more optionality to say, do you really need me as an analyst to live in this area? I want to move to Wyoming or Idaho. I might even be willing to accept less money. I want to have a quality of life, and I'm going to make it an effort to even do a better job. So I think it's going to create a tremendous amount of opportunity. Even in my community, we're actually seeing families creating more offshore entities and structures for a variety of different purposes. Staying a little bit on that theme related to, Dakin, maybe your move from California to Wyoming, great state. I've been there multiple times. What is going to happen, and COVID may be pushing this along, but effectively to America's great cities? I'm in the backdrop of New York, which is being heavily impacted and very scary as this winter we head into cold and flu season. Outdoor restaurants are closing, museums are closed, the cultural aspect is gone. Companies are working relatively efficiently remotely, but even your former backyard, the Bay Area, LA, do we have a problem, or how could you put a positive spin that this will be a good thing and the cities will evolve and adapt?
Well, I would say that the Bay Area and LA are screwed, to use your word. California is just so poorly run and mismanaged that that was coming for those cities anyways, and people were already fleeing because of just the problems that the state has and how it's run. I think New York personally will just always be New York. Even if every other city in the United States kind of disperses and becomes a much wider sprawl, people are going to go to New York for the feel of New York and the energy of New York. And I'm sure I had a lot of wealthy friends leave New York in this period, and you're going to see a change and a reset in the city where some more youth, some more up and comers are kind of coming in, and I think that's a good thing for the city to kind of periodically reinvent itself. I think beyond New York, though, frankly, you're going to see a major trend towards deurbanization, towards rural communities, towards suburban communities. And I would focus less on, is that good for the city or not, and more, is that good for the people? I think it's great for the people. I think the quality of life someone can have in a lower cost location where they have space, they have the ability to get outdoors and enjoy nature, and they have like a whole integrated, balanced life, that's going to be fantastic for a lot of people. And I'm excited for a lot of people to enjoy the benefit of that.
And I know it's not a core to what you guys do, but I would want your opinion, and relates to my last one or two questions. When is education going to get disrupted? When is Silicon Valley and others going to get involved? And are colleges a highly antiquated model where we're going to start to see them drop one by one?
Well, I haven't asked Bill his opinion, but I'll jump in on this one, and maybe we agree, maybe disagree. I don't know. I think colleges make absolutely no sense. You know, we're planning to have our first kid in the near future. No chance that kid goes to college. I'll just send him over to Idealab to learn from Bill. But there's already actually a lot happening in this world. I'm a personal just investor in a company that wouldn't have been a fit for a fund, for the fund called Higher Ground Education, that is kind of totally updating the pedagogy and curriculum of schools to be child first, kind of using a Montessori-like approach. They're the largest operator of Montessori schools. And then they have all these virtual programs too, where, education should be about a child discovering the thing that lights them up and going deep in that and getting really curious. Because like learning detailed facts isn't the thing that sets someone up for success. Learning how to learn is what sets people up for success. And I think technology has a part to play in that, but it also has to do with setting people up for a 21st century education. You know, the current education system, technology aside, is set up around sit down, shut up, get in your seat, and was designed to train people to go work in a factory where that was the skill set that was required. In the next 100 years, the skill set is get curious, get excited, get energized about a subject, and go figure out how to dig into that yourself and do research and explore and investigate. And so I think that's the fundamental thing that's going to change. And I do think that, like a lot of the pod learning that people have probably seen in their communities, where tutors are working with small groups of kids and they're designing their own path through things, is going to set people up for a way better future.
And Bill, any comments about that?
Well, I think education is being disrupted right now. Like, I think just like COVID sent a shockwave to telemedicine, to medicine with telemedicine, I think COVID is sending a shockwave to everybody rethinking how they're going to do education, how colleges need to rethink themselves. Again, a little bit of what you're saying also about the cities. I agree with Dakin completely. We will be able to go back out again at some point. Through a combination of one of Dakin's companies or other companies, we will have a vaccine. We will get through this. We will get through COVID, and people will be able to go back out again. That doesn't mean, though, that colleges won't reinvent themselves anyway, and medicine won't reinvent itself anyway, and transportation won't reinvent itself anyway, because it needs to. This is, just like you said, accelerating the push, because those that don't get on this will go out of business. And a lot of colleges will go out of business unless they rethink their whole mission, how they achieve it, everything that Dakin said. It has to be about teaching people to be learners, not teaching people to facts, because your job is going to change now every year for the rest of your life. So if you're not a learner, you're out of it. So that was happening anyway, but now the colleges have to change their whole method of teaching to accommodate that reality.
And Dakin, I'm going to take one of the questions in a chat feature from the participant and slightly tweak it a little bit. And it could apply to Bill as well. But when you come across an entrepreneur that appears smart and talented and maybe even has a good idea, it gets a little bit of your interest, but you decide to walk away. What are some things that you look for that would be a major red flag to you, especially with the younger first-time founder?
Ego. It's like, and that's the challenge with a lot of the early stage startups. Basically, with really young founders, you often end up in a situation where they think I was this founder. You're going to take over the world, solve all the problems, and I've got all the right answers. And that's just not the case. They're too focused on the vision piece and not enough on the flexibility and adaptability piece. And so whenever we invest with somebody who is a first-time founder, one of the key questions we really dig in on is, if it turns out that what this company needs in order to succeed in its mission is for you not to be the CEO, how are you going to feel about that? Are you going to proactively bring that up? If we bring that up, what's that discussion going to be like? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And, people, you can get a real sense of, does that threaten and hit something core in them where that's going to be a real issue and a real conflict? And if it does, they're not in it for the right reason. They're in it for a sense of significance and importance rather than for the impact their mission can have. And, someone like, what's ironic is the more the person is the right person to be the CEO, the immediate thing they bring up is, I don't care about being the CEO. I just want to make sure the company succeeds. That's one of the first things Bill ever said to me. And that humility is just so important. And it's hard to be humble as a 21-year-old. That's not how we're wired.
Yeah, you need the experiences of a few losses to get humbled, and it takes time. It's like one person once told me when we had a mistake at Knowledge Adventure, and I don't know, we lost $2 million on something because we spent it on some project, it didn't work out, whatever, and I was really, really depressed about it. And we had this consultant talking to us, and he said, "Bill, you just paid $2 million tuition for that lesson. Are you going to take that lesson, or are you going to ignore it? Like, you just paid a lot of money for that course." And you have to have some of those expensive lessons to really get that humility, and it just takes time.
And I did hint at it a little bit earlier. I'm going to ask it a little bit more directly. We do have some families, and supposedly I've been even encouraging of some, but I think I've been a little bit careful as I do it, to effectively very, very large single family offices to kind of create their own internal VC. Sometimes they're looking to engage generations in the family. I often recommend looking at it very carefully, bringing in outside talent and resources. And I had one family that effectively elected to move forward. I'm like, well, how many companies, it's early stage, $50,000 to $100,000 checks, how many are you going to invest in? I thought they were going to say a couple of dozen, maybe even 100. They're like, well, we're probably looking over time. I don't know if time is 1 year or 10 years, probably 500 to 1,000. I'm like, wow. And then I looked at it relative to their AUM, and that was only 50 to 100 million. I use that loosely, only 50 to 100 million. I mean, they could afford to do that. Why is that probably still a bad idea?
Well, I'm not going to presume that it's a bad idea, but the way that the VC industry works, right, is you have a few companies that matter every year, and those few companies drive all of the returns. Like if you were in the Sequoia fund that was in Google, like that fund was up like 90x or something crazy. And pretty much every other fund that year sucked. Investing in VC overall sucks. It's not a good investment asset class unless you're with the absolute best managers. And, I think if you are one of the best managers in the world, you're probably not going to go work for a family office and be inside of an organization that you're not running yourself and that has probably different economic structures than what VCs have today. And so I think you got to be careful about adverse selection. And in the long run, right, like a lot of people worry about like things like fees and carry, and like they actually matter a lot if you're investing with the wrong people in a certain sense. In another sense, they don't, because a lot of the people that you invest with in VC, you're not even going to get your money back, and the fees and carry weren't going to matter anyways. If you're investing with the best people, you're not going to have cared what the fees and carry were, because if you're in an 88x fund, it just doesn't matter. So that's the risk. Now, I actually know, and we work with some family offices that have done this well and have attracted good people. And I think the best way that I've seen family offices do this is still they're investing with a bunch of funds, and they're using those funds to kind of get deal flow for their direct deal flow. I haven't really seen family offices that are just like crushing it at like seed investing. That's a hard business to attract the right manager to run inside.
Bill, any comments on that?
Well, yeah, I'm thinking from my perspective and why I like working with Dakin so much. From a VC perspective, you need to identify, Dakin can probably break this down better than me. This is my first time I'm breaking it down because I'm not really a VC. I start the companies and I'm more on the receiving end of VC as opposed to being a VC. But you need to identify the deal, you need to win the deal, and then you need to help the deal. So identifying the deal means being in the deal flow, and like Dakin said, being around, seeing everything, being aware of it. To win the deal, you have to offer something that the entrepreneur says, I want that guy. I want that guy more than someone else. Like I'm willing to either take a lower valuation, or I'm willing to cut out someone else, or I'm willing to go to bat to get that guy in. So, for example, Dakin is that guy. I want that guy in my deal. And then and why do I want him in a deal? Because he's fair, he's got integrity, and he's going to help me after the deal. So to help me after the deal, that is a whole separate skill set. Like in Dakin's case, it's physics, engineering, his whole team that brings value to my company afterwards. So as a family office, to compete with that, you got to compete on all three of those things. You need to find someone who has those things, or you have to build that, and that's non-trivial. Delivering those things to an entrepreneur is hard. Deal flow, that's a separate skill. But winning the deal, like why should I take your money over someone else's? That's a special skill, and it's very valid to the entrepreneur when they're making that decision.
And maybe
it boils down to talk about if you're putting $100 million at work or something like that. Do you believe you're going to go build and if you do, I think you should do it. Do you think you're going to build a better team than a VC that is raising from a bunch of people, has more resources because they have that kind of diversified pool of assets that they're raising from, and is incentivizing their people with big chunks of carry such that, it's a win-win-win around the board? And so in effect, I think to actually do it really well, you have to just set up your own VC inside, give them the same kind of economics that they would. And at that point, it's like, well, you could have just invested with the 5 best managers that are out there if you can get access. And you should do that. Probably it's easier.
Okay, but following up on that, and you kind of hinted in how you said it, VC tends to be very concentrated. A lot of them are the old guard funds where people keep on re-upping. A lot of them have institutional investors putting in $50 to $100 million checks. It's hard, even for $1 billion family office, to sometimes get access. They may need to go through a fund of funds and accept higher fees, or someone like you who's younger and dynamic and may have more opportunity for a family and their capital to make a difference. And you got a great track record, but how they identify that and how they get into who's going to be the next Sequoia, the next benchmark, et cetera. It's hard.
The one thing I wouldn't agree with is if you look at the performance of the brand name funds, once they are already a brand name, the performance actually tends not to be that great. The Sequoia fund that defined Sequoia is a decade ago or more. Now, they've all become bigger platforms that are good growth stage investments, but for early stage investments, you're not going to get the kind of returns that you will with emerging managers. And that I think is a more interesting question to ask, is how can we build a team and a network and a sourcing approach that finds us the next best emerging managers? And that is the thing I think that family offices should be focused on. And a lot of our LPs ask me, who are the other emerging managers that we should be in with? And that if you can kind of get in with somebody, through one of your friends and through one of your contacts that is already in, they can then tap you into a whole network of kind of who are the next up and coming folks. And that's the key, I think, is focusing on emerging managers. That's where all of the alpha is.
And maybe Dakin, on that note, since you kind of are that stage, but doing very, very well, how could those that would be interested in learning more find out about what you do in your fund, and how could they perhaps reach out to someone inside the firm, whether through the website, a link, a direct email? I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, just go to our website. It's primemoverslab.com, and you're welcome to email me, dakin@primemoverslab.com. And looking at the folks that are on the Zoom, we have LPs that are part of your network that can kind of be reference checks for us and about the way in which we interact with LPs and the results that we produce.
And is it possible either to have some co-investing? Do you sometimes create SPVs that create opportunities to be a direct investor?
Yeah, we basically, our whole strategy is we kind of invest at the seed stage. And then when we do Series A investments in the ones that are breaking out and doing well, we offer SPVs that are very no fee and basically very low carry to come into those companies directly as well.
Excellent. And Bill, you're doing amazing things at Idealab. How could people learn more about that?
Well, I'd love to talk to you about it. My email is bill@idealab.com. Email me any questions or thoughts, and I'd love to share more with you.
And with some of the amazing companies and track record that you have and the number of unicorns relative to the number of investments is stunning. How could potentially investors, could they be a direct investor? Do you set up SPACs, SPVs? Do you identify funds that are going to have access to some of your entrepreneurs and recommend they get in there?
Yeah, if someone would tell me what stage they're interested in, we could come to them as the companies are doing rounds at each of those stages. Like if someone was really interested in, very early stage, we could notify them when we're starting a new company. If someone wanted to know about Series A financings, we could tell them and they could participate at that stage. With Dakin right now, with one of our companies, maybe we would do a very late stage growth round, possibly before an IPO next year. So we could come to do something like that. So if someone lets me know either what area of interest or what stage of interest, I can keep them apprised of when we do one of those.
Well,
and not to plug too much, but we do have a right to invest in all of Bill's companies, so that's the easiest way.
Yeah, that would probably do it. Well, this has been fantastic because we did have a conversation also about investing. I'll give a little bit of Angelo's informal disclaimer. My podcast is really focused on significant families of wealth that are single family offices. At minimum, I would say probably really need to be a astute investor, even in my opinion, more than accredited, probably at least a qualified purchaser. But this podcast is simply for educational purposes and entertainment. Your situation is going to be your risk tolerance and so many different factors. You may also see or hear this, I don't know, a year, 10 years from now, and things could be totally different. So you need to do your own diligence. You need to make your own decision. And especially investing in earlier stage companies, again, a lot of them are not going to make it. So just a heads up and make sure to do your own diligence. Everyone, I'm Angelo Robles. I'm the host of the Angelo Robles Podcast and founder and CEO at Family Office Association. We're a global membership organization dedicated to families of wealth and their single family offices. We do a tremendous amount of original proprietary content. We've been incredibly active during COVID-19, literally hosting hundreds of digital and online programming and interviews, really more active than ever. One day physical events will come back and we'll weave them in to the new world of digital. It'll be a combination of both. But we've been incredibly active in our content, our thought leadership, our master classes that we created on family offices. So take a look at our website, which is new and updated in the last month or so, familyofficeassociation.com. And I'm also very active on social media. We're Family Office, the channel, Family Office on YouTube, and very active on Instagram and LinkedIn as well. And my direct email is angelo@familyofficeassociation.com. Gentlemen, Dakin and Bill, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.